as you all know, Charlie Ford has moved on. He has decided to join us, or at least that's his name at the bottom of my screen. So I presume that's him and no one else imitating him. Yeah, since Charlie's moved on, sort of a combination of myself and Dane and a few of the others at Basketball England have come together to lead us through the rest of return to play, which we hope is not going to be for a huge amount of time longer. And we are massively in debt to Charlie for helping us get us this far at the moment. And he has had an influence in the way that we're going to go forward as well, because he's helping England Boxing to decide how their return to play is going to go as well. So it's useful having him sort of in the background helping us as well. But as you all know, as of yesterday, we moved up to level 1 of our return to play criteria, and that's in line with the government's next stage of their opening out of facilities, etc. I'm sure you've all been hugging everyone sort of supremely tightly over the last sort of 24 hours. But what we'd like to do in this webinar is really sort of outline the changes that we perceive the next few weeks to sort of come into play, and how that's going to look from your perspective at the club level, and sort of delve a little bit more into some of the detail around that. And then we'll touch on summer sort of basketball and what clubs need to do in order to get that up and running, and what we'd like you to do from that perspective, but also look at the big topic of conversation, which is effectively the spectators and what that looks like within your venues, really. As ever, please do chuck any questions into the chat function. Myself, Gail Richardson, sorry, I forgot to introduce you, Gail. Gail's on the call with us as well, to look at it, help us out from a sort of leagues and playing perspective. And then Dr. Dane Vishnabala, who most of you will know, is also on the call as well. But yeah, we'll be answering sort of any questions as we go along. And then at the end of it, we will have time for Q&A if anyone wants to sort of add your question in at that point. But to just give a bit of a brief background, the changes to the RTP came in having had a discussion with Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and DCMS and Sport England gave us the green light to move on to the next stage from yesterday's date. And they also, at that point in time, told us that the ability to have spectators within your venues was going to be granted from yesterday's date. And so I think the spectator element for us was a bit of a surprise. We weren't expecting that so early, but we feel that it's a really positive step forward for the sport. So hopefully you guys all see that from your perspectives as well. The biggest thing for us all is just to bear in mind that we still need the mitigation strategies in place. COVID hasn't gone away. And we are asking, at least for the next few weeks, that everyone is extremely mindful of the strategies that we've implemented throughout the last 12 months, and they should really be stuck to for the next few weeks, probably going a bit further as well. But before we delve into some of the sort of more finer detail, Dane, can you just give us an update on COVID, where we're at, where you see the infection is at the moment, or the virus is at the moment, and the vaccinations and stuff like that?
Yeah, so evening all, hope everyone's all right. So I'm sure many of you have been watching the news and so are up to date, but just to kind of give you the kind of key numbers and updates as usual. Vaccination wise, UK wise, we're doing extremely well. I believe there are 36 million in total vaccinated with at least a first dose, and 20 million now have a second dose. And if you look at kind of 7-day rolling trends, that's what we generally want to look at rather than single days. We are now at 15,000 cases, which is a comparison significantly down from January, where we had about 55,000 cases. So there is a significant difference there. But as we all know, the issue with COVID is if one person gets it, they then spread it to X number of people. So it's an exponential increase. So I guess it's positive that it's coming down, and hopefully that'll continue. Hospital admissions, the latest data suggests is around 750 admissions in the last 7 days. And in January, we had 4,000 in 7 days. So, we are in a very different place to when we initially wrote a lot of these RTPs and tried to enforce them, which is good. So risk generally is coming down. Deaths wise, we have 62 deaths in the last 7 days, and it was 1,283 back in January peak. So big differences, which is really positive. The biggest, I think, element that everyone is really concerned about now is the Indian variant. So just like, we had the Kent variant for a while, and to be fair, the Kent variant is now one of the main dominant variants around the world. Now there's the Indian variant. So everyone's kind of concerned about two things really. Will this spread quicker than the current variant we have in the country? Will there be more deaths because of it? And does the vaccine still work? And at present, there is nothing to suggest the vaccine doesn't work. So it does suggest that there is protection. So the government strategy based on that really is to try and speed up vaccination. So you may have seen, or you may have been requested, so instead of a 12-week gap, the second dose is trying to be given to most people around 8 weeks. So kind of moving forward that. And while that's good, there is something to consider with that. So if you get a lot of the 50s, so 60s, 50s, 40s age groups that are waiting for their second, give them an earlier second dose. That does mean though that people generally in their 20s and 30s, early 30s particularly, may need to wait longer depending on stock and supply. So depending on, who's in your team and so on, you might find that actually some people get vaccinated later than initially planned. So we'll have to see how stocks go. But obviously stocks, as many of you seen, are a current issue. So the vaccination site I'm at, stocks are very variable, I guess because we're relying a lot on imports as well. So for us, I guess, while we wait to see what happens with the Indian variant, many of you have seen, is it Bolton that had a little kind of spike of that on pickup? We'll need to see how quickly it spreads and what the local kind of management's going to be. At the moment, we've been told that local areas aren't going to be managed differently. So that's important. But there are lots of unknowns. So do keep an eye on your local area and what's going on. And definitely feed into us if you're getting conflicting or different advice. And we'll obviously need to keep reviewing. But I think this stage now there is government guidelines, but there's also common sense in managing your risk. And there'll be some things that you can easily do and continue, which you may wish to anyway, even when the time comes where all rules go out the window. And I think that's for each individual club to almost weigh up as well. Perfect. That's probably it for me really on that front.
Thanks, mate. I think well worth noting, as we've said throughout the whole of this process, if government guidance changes, then we will have to change our guidance as well. So whilst we have moved to level 1 at the minute, we certainly haven't got rid of all the paperwork that goes with level 2s, 3s, 4s, etc. So if required, we would implement a sort of backward step. But obviously, everyone in this call is hoping that doesn't happen. So the biggest change really from a return to play perspective was that everyone has now moved to Basketball England's level 1 of our return to play. So if you recall back in sort of March, April time, 2020, then we were at level 5, which was effectively no one was going outdoors. And then we have been given the green light to put everyone to level 1 now, which alongside of all of our classified elite level players means that non-elite adults can now get back on court, both indoors and outdoors. That is a change from previous, where the non-elite adults could play outdoors, at least in their respective bubbles, but now we're moving indoors, and there is no necessity to have bubbles of 15 indoors as well. So from a capacity perspective for the players and coaching staff, we are now allowed 30 people on court maximum. We, as a governing body, would still advocate the bubble system. So if, for instance, you are going back on court now for the first time, we would still sort of remind you that the bubble system has been proven to reduce transmission rate in and amongst groups of people. And therefore, if you choose to, within your club environments, to sort of continue to do smaller bubbles, then again, we would sort of advocate that, certainly. We're allowed to have competitive basketball through every age group now. But again, I would stress, as we have done over the last couple of webinars, that the physical conditioning of individuals might be might not be quite where you would like it to be, and therefore your injury risk will go up if all of a sudden you start playing 3 or 4 competitive games a week, for instance. Now that will vary between individuals, and most of you will have heard me bang the drum for some of our physical prep work that we can do, and you can find that on the website under the Sports Science and Medicine team. If you were to type into the search bar physical robustness, there is an 8-week well, there's a couple of different programs in there that players can use to get them physically ready to come back on court. It's all sort of living room based or garden based work. It doesn't require a gym or anything like that. But I think it's worth us all acknowledging that even though we're allowed more people on court and we can return to competitive basketball, we're still asking everyone to utilise the mitigation strategies that we've got in place, the screening, etc., just so that we are, again, being able to spot the asymptomatic cases before they even return on court. So just to recap, we're utilising things like temperature checking to make sure that someone that's arriving to training hasn't got a temperature, even though they might not be aware of it. And then also that we're using our screening protocol, asking the correct screening questions, again, just to try and make sure that we're not allowing anyone in that might have symptoms onto court. I think from a non-elite adult perspective, we at Basketball England are very aware that that's probably the group of individuals that have suffered the most without really being able to get back on court throughout the whole of this time. So we're super happy that everyone can get back and play. I'm very mindful that if you're an individual the same age as me and I haven't played for 12 months, my Achilles and my knees aren't necessarily going to like it particularly. So I would definitely push that physical robustness element to it. The government have allowed us to, or are allowing carpooling. So if you recall, just before April the 12th, they asked us to not advocate carpooling. It was deemed as too high risk. They are now saying that carpooling is allowed, but from our perspective, we would not encourage that. Again, it's the enclosed spaces that might increase transmission rate. So if you do have to carpool, please make sure that before you allow the people to get in the car, that they are screened, and in an ideal world the temperature would be taken prior to that. Individuals in the car still have to wear face masks, and if you can, drive with the windows open to increase ventilation. Wiping down the major surfaces is also obviously highly recommended from a hygiene perspective. So the big question that we are getting through to us is around the spectator guidance. Now, there's a number of elements to being able to produce guidance for spectators, as you might imagine. Firstly, the biggest factor in all of this is the venues. So firstly, will a venue want spectators, and does either the company or the people that run the venue, are they allowing spectators? That's one of the big questions you need to ask yourself. We would not override what the venue state. So if the venue states they're unable to have spectators, I'm afraid we can't change that. The second element really is that there needs to be a distinct definition of spectators. So spectators are people that are not playing or coaching that basketball session. There should be no contact with the players on the court at any point during that time, and there needs to be distinct separation between where the spectators are and where the players are. So what we would recommend is that there is either a taped off or cordoned off area where spectators are allowed to enter. They stay in that zone, and then they leave from a separate entrance or exit, so that there is no contact with the players. The only caveat to that, and it's something that has cropped up very occasionally, but I think it might crop up a little bit more, is if there is a welfare need for a child, so an under 11, where a parent is required from a welfare perspective to stay with that player then that parent can obviously join them on court. We are classing those individuals as parent helpers. So it'll be an adult parent or guardian to help that individual. Just be aware that if that individual enters the court, they're obviously mixing with the other players and staff, therefore they would need to be screened alongside of any player and coach. And they would also contribute to the maximum number allowed on court, which is 30. So just to make that clear, they are allowed on court, they have to be screened, they do contribute to the maximum numbers allowed on court, which is 30, and that's because the government have sanctioned us to have a maximum of 30 on the court. I hope that is clear. So when we look at spectators for outside of the court environment, those spectators, like I say, have to be within that designated area. They're not, the government stipulation for individuals indoors allow us to have bubbles of 6, whereas outdoors we can have bubbles of 30. Indoors, this bubble of 6 is only to be made up of a maximum of 2 households. That bubble of 6 needs to be separated and abide by social distancing guidelines, and they should all be wearing face coverings as well. Clearly, we would ask the venue or yourselves as clubs to provide hand sanitizer before you go into the venue, and clean and wipe down the major contact areas. And we would also advocate a self-screening for those individuals that make up the spectators. So I think it would be, well, we were talking about sort of, can the club or the venue temperature check everybody? I think for a number of clubs that might be very tricky. If you feel it's that you can do it and you feel comfortable with doing that for all your spectators, then brilliant, feel free to do so, but it won't be a necessary stipulation. I would absolutely advocate you having signs and symptoms poster on the entrances to make sure that people are reminded that they shouldn't be arriving with coughs and colds, etc. But then that bubble of 6 will remain as one as they come into the venue and then leave the venue. There shouldn't be any congregating car parks and things like that. I hope that makes that pretty clear. I think I've got everything there. Dane, is there anything that you think needs to be...
No, I think I was...
Great. Just looking at the chat function, Sue, you've said, does under 11 mean 11 and under? In my head, I'm primary school age, basically, is what we're classing that as. So that would be 11 and under, I believe. Peter, clarifying the bubbles of 6, not 8, definitely bubbles of 6. So from April the 12th, we were allowed indoors with our elite and our age group basketball players, but the government wanted us to stick to maximum bubbles of 15, so 1 at each end of the court effectively. We're now allowed to mix the whole 30 together. The only thing we are advocating is that if you as a club want to reduce your transmission risk, then we know that having a bubble system in place is a good way to do that. It also means if someone within that bubble was to become positive, it would only, as long as other sort of strategies have been used, then that bubble will be the only bubble that has to isolate and not the whole group. Okay, so are players on the bench expected to wear face masks while not playing? Yes, so all the strategies from a transmission perspective that we've put in place at the moment need to carry on, I'm afraid. So face masks for coaching staff, face masks for non-playing players, they should carry on. In terms of the officials, again, same sort of process. If you're a table official, wearing the face mask or a visor is mandatory as well. Everyone happy with that? So just one thing I forgot about the spectators. We've got by the way, we've got a bit of guidance coming out tomorrow around that. But when we look at how many spectators are allowed in a venue, from our perspective, that is extremely difficult to guide from that. The numbers is going to be very venue specific. Clearly, there are numerous different venues around the country of different sizes, shapes, etc. The guidance that's coming from the government is that as a very rough guide, the amount of space required for each individual within a venue is 100 square feet for an individual. So the average basketball venue, single court venue, is, we believe, around about 7,000 square feet. So that means that your total capacity within that venue is likely to be around 70 individuals. Now, if we take into account 30 of those individuals will be on the court, that's going to leave you with the prospect of having 40 spectators within that venue. Now, here comes the difficult bit. A number of us will know of venues where there's a 1 meter runoff, for instance, around the edge. Trying to fit 40 people around the edge there is going to make life quite tough, and it's also going to be tough if you want to then designate where those spectators go. In my opinion, if you're trying to cram spectators around a court and they're encroaching onto the court space, that won't be a very good way to mitigate transmission risk. So you'd have to ask yourself the question, is it okay for us to have spectators at this venue? Some venues might look at their space and the court runoff area, for instance, and say, right, well, we're not allowing spectators, and we'll have to respect that decision. For other venues that have got a large runoff area or even bleachers or some sort of seating area, then the decision to have spectators might be a bit easier to have. So I hope that gives a bit more guidance, and like I say, it's coming out tomorrow on the website around what that looks like. But one of the reasons we didn't put that out first off was because we felt that to guide everybody in terms of what their individual venues is going to be like is going to be really tricky. So having an idea of 1 person per 100 square feet is a useful tool for us all to work off. Does that sound okay? Cool. Righty ho. So Dane, could you just touch on why we need to continue with the screening process, really, and if there's anything else that you would see as good practice to mitigate transmission?
Yeah, I think this is kind of more reinforcement from what we talked about before. Obviously, till the key D-Day by the government date, we're going to carry on our processes as usual. But in terms of carrying on screening off that, there's always the risk benefit, and all of us will have different opinions, being really honest about what risk is, right? Some of us will say, well, actually the risk is now a lot lower than before, and we need to try and get back to normality. And others will say, well, we need to keep going to try and get these numbers lower. So, and there are multiple camps of opinion on that. My thoughts are just, whatever you decide, obviously at the moment, it's quite clear what you need to do. When the government date comes, then I guess your challenge at that point is, do you still screen? And these are things we will also try and give advice on, but do you still screen? And if so, is it just self-screening? Or are you going to still document this? What hygiene are you still going to keep in place? And I would argue that hygiene is something really simple and easy to continue with. I can't see that ever being a bad thing. And what points will you tell people that if they're feeling unwell, it doesn't matter what it is, that actually they don't come back to their feeling better, which again is kind of simple public health measures. So I think those are things to start thinking about as a club in terms of what does the future look like. But in terms of now, we're going to follow current advice, and that hasn't changed. And I think it's important because the rates are coming down, and every little bit we do, this is why you should move in automated routes. Every little bit we do gets that rate down that little bit lower, which is critical. And that always with a new variant, the risk is about re-increase. And I guess that's what we really want to avoid here. And it's that balance between what you do in basketball and then what's happening outside of basketball. I'm sure many of you seeing, I went to the supermarket today, it looks like social distancing has gone out the window. So, you know, you have to be pragmatic as well. And I think we will try and definitely give advice on what we think is easy wins post, but I'm sure many of you have your own thoughts on that. Is that all right? I think it really comes down to common sense, doesn't it? At this point in time, all of us know enough about what to do and how not to do it. And we need to decide what we're going to move forward with.
I think as a sport, we've seen a great success in utilising our screening processes, actually. And I think it's been acknowledged at Sport England and DCMS as, you know, we've been quite a good guide for a number of sports into how they might reduce their transmission rates. So certainly I wouldn't dismiss our screening processes or the temperature checking. I think that's a vital part of reducing the transmission, really. In terms of, so you say about primary school players needing to wear masks on the bench. Is it, I guess from my perspective, are these primary school players playing it within a school environment, or are they in the club environment? And, you know, the education sector has, in a lot of cases, some different rules and regulations around this sort of thing. I think if you're playing it in a PE session and no one's wearing masks, then, well, you're not going to then put the masks on them. If in your club environment everyone's wearing masks, well, it seems a bit remiss to not ask those players to wear a mask as well. But it's I don't know, difficult balance to get, really. Nick, any thoughts if June 21 changes will be removed, removing the need for PPE, maximum 30, spectator limits? Asking if clubs are making decisions soon about playing in summer competitions may choose not to if these restrictions remain, or worse, just play friendlies. Yeah, Nick, it's a really good point. So we are nutting out what we've perceived the new norm to be. I think just in the last, well, just over the weekend, I think it's worth keeping a cautious view on the June 21st date, especially given the government's cautious sort of wording that they're using when it comes to this Indian variant. Certainly after June 21st, I would hope that all of these mitigation strategies that we've been using all the time are there's less emphasis on them, but as Dane says, there's going to be a pragmatic approach to things. Certainly we will be asking everybody to keep going with some of the hygiene elements. I think the use of some of the traditions that we've all had in sport around coughs and colds and things like that probably need to be rethought. So the sort of turn up to play because I've got a cough and a cold and I can push through it, or I'm going to run it off type of thing, that's going to have to change. And I think also in some respects whistleblowing is probably too strong a word, but having players or coaching staff picking up on other players that do have these coughs and colds and realising that it's not okay to carry on playing or expose other people to that is going to be something that we all need to get used to, I think. But we are going to sort of put out there a little bit closer to the time when we understand that Boris has given the green light for June 21st. We are going to put out what we perceive as the next step as such, but I fully would like to not have to worry too much about temperature screening, PPE and things like that. We believe that the maximum court numbers and spectator numbers will go, but I don't hold me to that. We'll wait to see what government say from an official perspective. It's kind of, that question actually kind of brings us on to Gail, really, because Gail, you can sort of give us a bit of an insight about what we're asking clubs to do for summer competition and tournaments or friendlies, etc. If you don't mind sort of giving us a bit of insight there.
Yeah, so we are doing the summer sanction form, which is the online form for anybody who's doing events, central venue leagues, or a league in its own right. Normally what you have in the summer activity for anything there. If it's a friendly game between two teams, then that's fine. We don't need to have that summer sanction form completed. But if it's an actual game, that's a league, a competition, or a CVL or an event, and obviously we need to have that sanctioned just to make sure that we can check it off against our return to play. We understand all the mitigation you're going through, and that you are affiliated, and that you've got a designated COVID officer, and that you've got everything in place. We do ask on there as well that the players are registered with us, and obviously, and that everything's upheld like a normal affiliation, just to make sure everything's insured and everything's above board in that sort of way. We will ask for things like your regulations for the competition, and also the teams that are competing, just to make sure that they're all following the return to pay process. They've got everything in place. Once we've got them forms in place, what we will do is authorise them or not authorise them, or ask some questions. And once they've been sanctioned, there is a section on the website where we are listing the clubs that are affiliated to Basketball England at the minute, and also the leagues that are affiliated to us as well. So everybody knows, if you're a parent or if you're a player or where you are, they've been through those checks to make sure that they are approved, sanctioned activity by us.
Thanks, Gail. Again, what we would hope is come pre-season, sort of August, September time, again, these aren't things that we need to think about. Gail, from a league's perspective, we are hoping to kick off as normal, sort of September, October time, aren't we?
Yeah, so we're looking at a late September, early October start for the majority of the junior leagues. I think a few of the senior leagues, because we're hoping to get the National Cup in this year, that they'll be ready to go at the end of September. And then obviously there'll be some activity in terms of the officials conference and things like that early September as well. So all being well, that teams have got this opportunity now to start playing, getting ready for the season. Obviously I know a lot of clubs have lost of income and players have dropped out, so hopefully this sort of time helps them. And then obviously we'll hopefully go with the league start then. We are aiming to get the entry forms out, released on Monday, fingers crossed. All being well, that they'll go out on Monday with some information on there about what the timescales in place to get those in.
Hopefully that answered your question, Barney. And I see that Charlie's jumped on and answered Keith and Judith's question. I can't let go there, man.
In terms of the registration point on there, the NBL registration, I think, lasts till the 31st. Sorry, if you're an NBL covered until the 31st of May, and the normal membership, I'm sure, runs to the 31st of August, but I will double check on that to make sure that those players, but the system now doesn't let you have that B membership for the year. It's only till that sort of period of time. But we know that a lot of people have rolled over fees or kept fees and things like that, so it's just something that's being worked on at the minute on there.
I'm glad you're on here for answering that, because I wouldn't know where to start with that. In terms of other things that I know of that's going to go ahead, we've got plans for the Aspire restart from October onwards. So look out for more information on that front. And then we're hoping that the England Talent Programme is going to restart later on next season as well. So looking at the England under 14, under 15 pathway teams as well. Guys, is there anything else that you guys as club members are sort of concerned or interested in at the moment in time? Nothing jumping out at us, which is always a good sign. I think it's probably about time that I made some sort of height joke for Dane in honour of Charlie. No?
Which I'm going to ignore because I'm above that.
Gav, just a couple of other questions in there. Barney, in terms of ETP this summer, at the moment it's not looking very likely. We might well have some England talent stuff coming into August, but we've just got to get a couple of Commonwealth Games things out of the way in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll focus a little bit on that. But obviously we'll let you know as soon as we know.
Just in terms of Sue's email message, we are sanctioning this week. We've Monday started all of our staff is back now from furlough, so we're working through them. There is some queries that people have raised on some of them, on some of the leagues and structures, but we're aiming to get those finished. We've been waylaid with a number of different topics between us all, obviously because we're back from furlough, so fingers crossed you'll see that list increasing now for some sanctioned activities. And in terms of players, yes, if they're playing in an affiliated league, then the players should be affiliated to those clubs and to those leagues in there, or to the club really more than anything, just to make sure that they've got the correct insurance to be playing. That's for Tom's message.
Great, thanks.
And just to let you know, Nick, we'll be working on there's a piece coming out on the summer sanction stuff and about membership and how membership looks, because obviously there's going to be information coming out about the league updates and structure. So yeah, that'll be coming out, further information on it. And obviously we can take the feedback on there, and I'll pass that feedback, Nick, what you've put in there as well, to the guys who look after the membership side of things.
Lovely. Okay, guys, so thank you for all of your time jumping on and just listening to us and our dulcet tones today. You never know, this might be the last webinar that we do on Return to Play, but I think from all of us, when we've done these sort of things, we've had great feedback from you guys, and hopefully you guys have found it informative. So I think as an organisation, we've learned quite a lot from doing these sort of things, and I think you'll see us in this sort of format over the next wee while. But having said that, hopefully we'll all be able to meet up face to face at some point fairly soon. If there's anything else urgent, then feel free to drop a line to support@basketballengland.co.uk. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank Gail and Dane for jumping on the call with me, and I'd wish you all the best and hopefully a lovely summer ahead. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.